Welcome to a deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something fundamental, um, intelligence. Specifically, we want to look at how human intelligence stacks up against artificial intelligence.
And also how our idea of what human intelligence even is has changed over time.
Exactly. It feels like a really important conversation right now. We've got two sources to help us unpack this. One kind of lays out the key differences between human and AI side by side.
And the other takes us on, well, a historical journey. It traces how theories about our own intelligence have evolved, over the last 150 years or so.
So our goal here is to explore these sources, see what insights they offer about what makes human intelligence unique, maybe, and where our understanding might be headed.
Yeah, let's get into it. It's a fascinating area.
Okay, let's start with that first source, the direct comparison, human versus AI. The first thing it really stresses is that, yeah, both can do impressive things, but their underlying nature, how they work, it's just different.
That's really the core of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just what they achieve, but how they get there. The mechanics are fundamentally distinct.
And the source breaks this down nicely. First up, the learning approach.
This is a big one. Think about how, a child learns what a cat is. You might show them one, maybe two times.
Right. Point and say cat.
Yeah, and they basically get it. They generalize. The source calls this one-shot learning. It's about grasping concepts quickly, often from just a few examples, pulling in context without you even realizing.
You don't need, a million cat photos.
Exactly. But AI, it usually needs what the source calls multi-shot learning, which means massive amounts of data, millions, maybe billions of examples to learn patterns.
Like training an AI to tell cats from dogs requires just tons of labeled images.
Precisely. So that difference in data need, it really highlights a basic difference in, efficiency and just a whole approach to learning.
It does make you appreciate the human brain's efficiency. Okay, what else? The source mentions cognitive flexibility.
Yeah. Humans are pretty good at adapting. We use intuition, past experiences, maybe knowledge from totally different areas to handle new situations.
Like figuring out a new phone without the manual?
Kind of, yeah. You draw analogies. AI, though, as the source describes it, is much more rigid. It's limited by its programming, by the data it was trained on.
So throw it something too far outside that training and it might just fail.
It can, yeah. Or fail in ways a human wouldn't. It doesn't have that sort of fluid, common sense adaptability we rely on.
And then there's one that feels very, very human. Emotional intelligence.
Definitely. We have genuine empathy. We can actually, feel and understand others' emotions. It's fundamental to how we interact socially.
We navigate the world emotionally, not just logically.
Exactly.
Right.
AI, the source says, can simulate emotions. It can write text that sounds empathetic or make art that evokes feelings.
But it doesn't feel them itself.
That's the key distinction the source makes.
Yep.
It's the difference between an internal subjective experience and just, mimicking behavior based on data patterns. AI lacks the lived experience of emotion.
Okay, what about creativity? Because sometimes AI generates stuff that really looks creative.
It absolutely can look creative, but the source draws a line. It suggests human creativity involves generating truly original concepts, leaps of imagination, breaking molds, connecting unrelated things.
And AI's creativity.
Is more about intelligently recombining patterns it learned from its data. It can make novel arrangements, sure, things that seem new to us, but the source questions if it's the same kind of fundamental conceptual originality.
It makes you think about what originality even means.
It does. And related to that complexity, decision-making. Human decisions are, messy.
Right. Not just logic A to B.
Far from it. We bring in personal history, culture, our emotional state, values, stuff that's hard to quantify.
Very different from how AI decides things, I imagine.
Totally. According to the source, AI decisions are data-driven, algorithmic. Logical, yes. Efficient, yes. Unbiased by emotion, sure. Which is great for some things.
But it lacks that human layer.
Exactly. It can't incorporate those subjective, personal, sometimes irrational factors that shape our choices.
Then there's attention. Humans can shift focus, notice things on the side, switch tasks. But, we also get tired or distracted.
Right. Our attention is adaptable, context-aware, but also kind of fragile. AI, the source points out, can have this relentless, unwavering focus on a task. It doesn't get bored like we do.
That sounds better in some ways.
For specific, narrow tasks, maybe. But the source implies a trade-off. AI might lack the intuition to know when to shift focus based on subtle cues, or a gut feeling, something outside its defined task. Our flexible attention comes with that, even with the distractions.
Memory's another interesting one. AI can store and recall huge amounts of data perfectly.
like a perfect digital filing cabinet. But human memory, it's completely different. It's associative. It's tied up with emotions, integrated with our experiences. We don't just remember facts. We remember how things felt.
And it's not always accurate, right? We misremember, conflate things.
Exactly. The source highlights that qualitative difference. AI memory is precise data retrieval. Human memory is about constructing this rich, subjective story of our past. Powerful, but flawed.
And we shouldn't forget a really practical point. Energy efficiency. The human brain is incredibly efficient.
It's actually amazing when you think about it. The source notes just how little power our brain uses compared to the massive computational resources and electricity needed for high-end AI. Biology versus silicon.
And maybe the biggest difference, the most philosophical one the source mentions, self-awareness.
Yeah, this gets into consciousness. The source basically says humans have true consciousness, that subjective sense of me, the ability to reflect on ourselves, our thoughts. That allows for growth, introspection.
Whereas AI
Lacks that, according to the source. An AI might analyze its own code, maybe, but it doesn't have that inner subjective experience of being. It's a profound difference.
Finally, the source talks about biological integration. Our intelligence isn't just software, it's embodied.
Right. It's shaped by having a physical body, interacting with the world through senses, feeling gravity, touching things. AI is computational. It processes data from sensors, but it doesn't have that direct, lived physical experience.
Wow. Okay, so taking all those points together, learning, flexibility, emotion, creativity, memory, self-awareness, embodiment. What's the big picture this source paints about human intelligence versus current AI?
I think it shows human intelligence as this deeply integrated, multifaceted thing. It's inseparable from our biology, our feelings, our subjective view, our consciousness. AI is incredibly powerful in areas involving data and patterns, things that align with parts of intelligence. But it operates on a fundamentally different basis right now, lacking that qualitative richness and conscious depth.
That's a really clear distinction to keep in mind. Now, let's layer on top of that our second source. How have we actually tried to understand and define this human intelligence over time? Makes you wonder, has our own definition stayed the same?
Not at all. As the source shows, our understanding has shifted dramatically. It's gone from fairly simple ideas to really complex frameworks over the last, century and a half?
So let's walk through that timeline a bit. Where does the source say it really begins scientifically?
Well, figures like Francis Galton back in 1869 are a starting point. He used statistics, tried to link intelligence to things like reaction time, even heredity, a very early quantitative approach.
And then James McKeen Cattell actually coined the term mental test in 1890, sort of formalizing the idea of measuring these things.
Right. And that led to a really big step in 1904 with Charles Spearman and his G-factor theory. This was huge.
The idea of a general intelligence.
Exactly. Spearman proposed that underlying all our different mental abilities, math, verbal, whatever, there's this single general intelligence factor, G, plus some specific abilities, NA. It was the first major theory trying to unify it all.
But interestingly, around the same time, you had Binet and Simon developing their test for a very practical reason.
That's right. Their goal wasn't initially about measuring some universal G. The French government needed a way to identify kids in school who needed extra help. So they focused on practical skills like judgment, reasoning, leading to the idea of mental age.
And that work got adapted by Lewis Terman in the U.S. in 1916, which gave us the famous IQ score mental age over chronological age times 100. That really cemented the idea of intelligence as a single number for a long time.
It became incredibly influential. But it wasn't long before people started pushing back. L.L. Thurstone in 1938 argued against a single G. He suggested there were actually 7 independent primary mental abilities like verbal comprehension, spatial skills, number skills.
So starting to break it down into different types.
Yeah, move towards seeing intelligence as multifaceted. And then Raymond Cattell in the 1940s added another layer, distinguishing between fluid intelligence.
That's like solving new problems, right? Thinking on your feet.
Exactly. Reasoning abstractly, independent of what you already know, versus crystallized intelligence.
Which is using the knowledge you've already picked up. Facts, skills.
Right, like vocabulary or general knowledge. Cattell showed these were distinct but related, adding a sense of how intelligence changes and grows over a lifetime.
And then David Wexler's tests, like the WAIS for adults from 1955, became super widely used. He also emphasized multiple abilities, giving subscores, reflecting that broader view.
And some took it even further. J.P. Guilford, also in 1955, came up with his structure of intellect model. He proposed, get this, 180 different intellectual abilities.
Wow, 180.
Yeah, based on different mental operations, content types, and products. He really expanded the scope dramatically.
So we see this clear trend, starting narrow with G, then moving to multiple abilities, then distinguishing types, and eventually suggesting potentially hundreds of facets.
Exactly. And that broadening really accelerates in the 80s and 90s with what you might call the multiple intelligences paradigm shift. Howard Gardner's theory from 1983 is probably the best known example.
Right, he argued the traditional focus on just logic and language was way too narrow.
Totally. He proposed multiple distinct intelligences like musical, bodily kinesthetic, movement, interpersonal understanding others, interpersonal understanding yourself, spatial, naturalistic, alongside the more traditional ones. He stressed these are valued differently across cultures, and education should nurture all of them. It really shifted thinking away from just a single score.
And Robert Sternberg's theory in 1993 added another important angle, focusing on analytical, creative, and practical intelligence.
Yeah, Sternberg defined intelligence in terms of adapting to the real world. So it's not just book smarts, analytical, or new ideas, creative, but also, street smarts, practical intelligence for navigating everyday life effectively. These ideas really influenced education.
Then moving into the 90s and beyond, the field started trying to integrate these ideas, often linking them to the brain, like the PASS theory.
Right, that connected cognitive tasks to brain functions like planning, attention, simultaneous and successive processing, drawing on Loria's neuropsychological work, trying to ground these concepts in the brain.
And John Carroll's three-stratum theory in 93 offered a structure, kind of organizing all these different abilities into a hierarchy.
Yeah, suggesting narrow abilities feed into broader ones, which might relate back to a general factor, sort of bringing structure to the complexity.
Which led to the big synthesis, the Cattle-Horn-Carroll, or CHC theory, in the late 90s. It combined many previous models into this comprehensive framework with maybe 10 broad abilities and loads of narrower ones. It's like the grand map of cognitive abilities.
And smack in the middle of all that integration, Daniel Goleman's work popularized emotional intelligence in 1995. That was crucial because it explicitly pulled emotions into the definition of being smart, understanding your own feelings, managing them, and dealing effectively with others' emotions.
Really broadening the definition beyond just thinking power.
Definitely. And today, the source mentions neurobiology is key, using brain imaging to see how intelligence relates to brain structure, efficiency, network connections.
Trying to find the physical basis.
Exactly. And identify things like working memory and executive functions as really critical components, strongly linked to G and higher cognition. The source also nods to how AI models influence how we think about human cognition and the idea of cultural intelligence being effective across different cultures.
Wow. Okay, that timeline is quite a ride. From reaction times to 180 abilities to emotions and cultural context. What's the biggest shift you see in that whole history?
For me, it's the move away from searching for one single, simple thing called intelligence, measured by one score. Instead, we've moved towards seeing it as this incredibly complex, multifaceted, integrated system. It's cognitive, yes, but also emotional, biological, and deeply tied to context. We've gone from focusing on what was easy to measure analytically to trying to embrace the whole messy, rich picture of what humans can do.
That really lands. And thinking about that evolution, it seems to connect directly back to our first source, that comparison between humans and AI.
Absolutely. How does knowing this history of our understanding shape how we view those differences with AI?
Well, think about those early theories, Galton, Spearman's G, the focus on logic and analysis in the early tests. Those really zeroed in on the kinds of analytical rule-based processing where, as the first source said, current AI is incredibly powerful, even if it gets there differently.
Right. AI shines in the areas that psychology first focused on when trying to measure intelligence scientifically. It's almost like we built AI to be really good at the first things we quantified in ourselves.
But then look at the later developments. Gardner's multiple intelligences, Sternberg's practical smarts, Goleman's emotional intelligence, the focus on embodiment, consciousness, cultural adaptation. These highlight the very dimensions where, according to the first source, AI is fundamentally different or limited right now.
Exactly. Things like true creativity, deep empathy, subjective awareness, flexible adaptation based on feeling and context, intelligence rooted in a physical body. The things we later realized were vital parts of human intelligence. These are the exact areas where the first source points out the biggest gaps or differences with AI.
So, putting the two sources together, it feels like they're saying human intelligence, as we've come to understand it through this long, broadening history, is just much more than computation. It's wider, more integrated, embodied, subjective, emotional, all these things that make us different from the powerful but distinct intelligence we see in AI today.
It underscores that AI isn't just a faster version of us. It's something else with its own strengths, its own limitations, and our own evolving self-understanding helps us see that divide more clearly.
Well, this has been a really illuminating deep dive, looking both at the AI we're building and how we've conceptualized our own minds over time. We saw those specific differences laid out, and then traced that fascinating history of our own definitions expanding.
And it's obvious this understanding isn't static, right? It keeps evolving as technology changes, as neuroscience progresses, as we learn more.
Absolutely. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given everything we've talked about, those uniquely human aspects like consciousness and empathy, and this historical broadening of what intelligence even means, what parts of human intelligence, maybe the ones we've only recently started to fully appreciate, might become the most critical, the most uniquely valuable in a future increasingly intertwined with artificial intelligence.